Welcome everybody to another Holistic Health Hour. We got a bunch of questions. There's a bunch of things to go over. So let's get started here. Oh, you know what? I put that down at the bottom. I wanted to go over this announcements just so you know that there will be no Zoom call on Monday, January 4th. I have to be traveling that day, so I apologize. So we won't have that first Wednesday in January 2023. So those that are listening to this after that time means nothing to you. But for those who are listening live, you know that story. So here's a question. Chronic yeast infections, chronic candida infections, 4 years of constant infection and nothing seems to help. Burning pain, sometimes a little itching. My last test with the clinic still showed yeast infections. Supplements, antibiotics, and diet, and this yeast infection is still there. Not sure what direction to go from there. Yeah, it's really difficult. Chronic yeast infections are really difficult. The the new course that we're going to have on holistic health and healing is going to have some information more on specifically on chronic yeast infections, but it's a very difficult thing to deal with. So whenever, you don't want to make light of that, and you already know that it's hard, but when practitioners just say, oh yeah, you're just going to take this probiotic and things are going to get better, it's just not that easy. There's some things that you can think about doing with chronic yeast infections that I will type out here. One can be doing probiotic enemas. Oops. So probiotic enemas can be helpful. So that's where you mix probiotics into just a warm water solution, and then you do an enema using an enema bag with the probiotic. And you try to hold it as long as you possibly can. And that's a probiotic. You can look up how to do a probiotic enema. There's different instructions on it, but you're basically doing it just like a coffee enema, but you're using a probiotic water solution instead. Another thing that you can do is make a paste out of plain yogurt plus probiotics. So, well, yogurts have probiotics in them, but not very much. So you're adding probiotics like a capsule, open up a capsule of probiotics to half a container of yogurt. You don't need a lot of yogurt. Mix it up and let it sit on the counter at room temperature for about 30 minutes. And then you actually have to take that in the shower and put that up your orifices everywhere you can. You can gargle with it. You can eat it that way. So if you add probiotics to your yogurt to eat, that's beneficial. Well, I eat yogurt all the time, but it's not helping. Well, there's not really truly a lot of pro-living culture in yogurt. So you want to add that to that. So that's one thing to do. You can actually do an enema with that as well. That's another possibility. So when you add probiotics to yogurt and leave it sit for half an hour, it's going to kind of liquefy more, because as the probiotics are growing in there, it will kind of break down the yogurt milk cultures, and it'll become much more liquid. And you can then use that as a enema too. Then you get into more serious things of trying to deal with your gut issues, and that has to do with doing SIBO protocols and different gut protocols and healing gut protocols, and then even what's called a fecal transplant. So a fecal transplant sounds really gross, but that's where you're taking feces from a healthy person, so someone who does not have yeast infections. This is really gross, but then you blend it up and you basically do an enema with that feces. Boy, that's horrible. Well, there's so much living culture in that other person's feces that it can be beneficial to help grow new culture in your gut. Nobody wants to hear about that, but that's actually a fantastic treatment for colitis, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, and it can be good for just horrible chronic yeast infections as well. Certainly, you want to start with some of the other ideas first. Can you talk about the FADS genes and what the circle, orange, -3 and -2 mean? So your FADS genes, it's right there on your genetic summary master, what they have to do. It really has to do with your ability to digest and utilize fat production. I'm not going to read this to you. But I think what this person is talking about is on your genetic summary, there's a -3 or a -2 or a -1 or a -0 or a +1 or a +2 or a +3. What does that mean? That means how far off a variant of normal are you? Now, there's about 50,000 people that have put their genetics into this software. So obviously other clinics other than us. Out of that 50,000 people, where do you lie as far as being, how bad are these genes? You could say it that way. How bad are you with the FADS genes or any genes compared to the 50,000 people? If you're in the minus, if you're at 0, you're equally the same as everybody else. Now, here's a graph that you can't see on your chart, but here's a graph. This is actually of your FADS genes. So if you're +3, you're way over here. This is you. This is the mean. This is the average of those 50,000 people. That means this is better. You're way better than the 50,000 people. So if you are showing a minus sign on any of those genes, that means you're better than the mean of that population. If you're showing a +3, then you're really a lot worse than the average population. So farther you go away from the mean is the number. So if you are a +1, here's an example of somebody who is a -2 on something. So you're far on the left side of the mean. This is a different gene. This is the FUT2 gene. Far on the left side of the mean, meaning this is something that you may want to address. Your FUT2 genes have to do with gut function and gut healing. So this might be something you want to address. Certainly with this, if you're in this, you don't need to do anything with your FADS genes. You're doing great. But here, this is a +2, I think. You are at, much worse than, you're worse than the normal. If you want to say that mean is the normal, that is the normal of the population of the people that are in this software. So that's what the plus means. Plus means you're actually on the negative side. It's just how statistics are read. And minus means you're on the good side. So if you're at 0, -1, +1, yeah, not really too much to worry about when you're at +2, +3. That's something you might want to address. Vasculitis. I think they mean remember, I'm just copying and pasting your questions from right how you type. So be cognizant of that when you're typing out your questions. The vasculitis, discoloration on my fingers. I eat a clean diet, plant-based, occasionally organic chicken and salmon. The supplements I was taking contained glycerin. Could this sugar alcohol cause the inflammation in my blood vessels? Certainly it can. Anything can be a cause of that. It is, that's just one possible thing. Glycerin in your supplements, maybe. Remember, there's a small amount of glycerin in your supplements. I'd far think that that you have as a better chance that it is some sort of food sensitivity to something that you're eating. So you could eat a perfectly clean diet and you could still have antibodies to different foods. So if you have antibodies to foods, it's really the protein in the foods, and it's really the the peptide, so a breakdown of that protein in that food. So let's say use gluten, for example. Gluten is a very long protein called gliadin, and gliadin breaks down in your stomach and by the hydrochloric acid and then ultimately by the enzymes secreted by your pancreas um, to different peptides down to just different amino acids. So it would be much more likely that you have a sensitivity to foods. And the way that you would find that out is you would run a Cyrex test. So a Cyrex 10, that's called the Array 10, would be the most appropriate test for that. That tests like 300 different foods or something like that. And that will test the peptides of them cooked and raw. This is the best way to do it because the peptides are different if the food is cooked versus raw. That's how you would find that out. Besides an anti-inflammatory diet, eliminate supplements that contain glycerin. What detox method can I incorporate? What supplements do you suggest? So again, going back to this, I'd say more likely it's some sort of food. You might want to do, if you don't want to run an Array 10, because I don't know if they're $500 or something like that, you could do a food elimination diet. So you could cut out different foods and then see if things change and then reincorporate different foods. So you could Google, how do you do a food elimination diet to find a food sensitivity. There's lots of information on that. My December 8th blood test results indicate my iron is and ferritin is normal. So your iron and ferritin are normal, but your hemoglobin is low. So most likely your iron is at the lower edge of normal for your hemoglobin to be low. Your ferritin could be normal or even elevated and have low hemoglobin, because ferritin is a function of iron carrying capacity, but it is also a function of inflammation in your body. Also, this person states that their lymphocytes are low. How can I increase hemoglobin and lymphocytes? Well, you have to determine if you have low hemoglobin, you have some sort of anemia. So it could be still iron deficiency anemia. It could be B12 or pernicious anemia. It could be folic acid anemia. So there's different types of anemia that you'd have to determine what that is. So finding a functional practitioner locally would be the best thing to do. I can't really do that over Zoom. I am going to soon have a bunch of videos on interpreting blood work that will be helpful, but I don't have those up right now. My B12 is over 2,000. So let's say if a person's B12, this is the same person, is over 2,000, can we rule out B12 anemia? Well, you really still can't. So you could have a B12 anemia because you can't absorb B12, and then your B12 would be low. You could have a B12 anemia because you're not getting B12 into the cells, and then your B12 would be high or average. I would not stop taking B12 just because my B12 is high in my blood. So I would continue on the B12. If your B12 is high in the blood, that actually can indicate that it's not getting into the cells very well. So you need to keep it high in the blood. So I would not stop with B12 in the blood. There's no harm in having elevated B12 in the blood. So I would keep doing that. My electrolytes results are normal. Why am I thirsty during the night? Sometimes. Well, there's lots of reasons why you can be thirsty during the night. You can still be dehydrated and still have normal electrolytes. So it's not a direct one-on-one relationship there. So so I'd still make sure that you're drinking when you're thirsty. How do I find out if I'm Th1 or Th2 dominant? Do I need to get tested? By who? And where do I go? So first of all, you have to find out if you have an autoimmune disease and what stage of that autoimmune disease you are. There's 3 stages of autoimmune disease. But in order to find out if you have antibodies to self-tissue, you really have to go to do a Cyrex test again. So Cyrex is a lab. So that's the name of a lab. And they are specialists in running antibody testing. So Cyrex Labs is what labs that you would get. You can order them through our site, or any functional medicine doctor that knows anything would be running Cyrex Labs. This particular one that I showed diagrams of here is the Cyrex Array 14, which is the mucosal immune reaction test. It tests a bunch of antibodies for different tissues and different things in your body. Just to give a general picture overview, does this person have autoimmune disease? You could certainly run a standard like LabCorp test and test for different antibodies, but like ANA antibodies, and there's different things that you could test through LabCorp through your doctor as well. So you want to see if you have antibodies to self-tissue. Thyroid test to see if you have antibodies to the thyroid, TPO antibodies, things like that. How do you know if you're Th1 or Th2 dominant? Well, you could vary between Th1 or Th2 dominance, and the best way to really know that is just clinically. So there's not really a test for that. I mean, you can run cytokine panels, but those can change day to day too. So that really wouldn't be the test, the perfect test for that. So in a Th1 dominance, your body is releasing a greater amount of different types of chemicals called cytokines than you are in a Th2 dominance. One of the best ways to do that is just from a clinical standpoint is if you are autoimmune and you take immune supplements, does that make you feel better or worse? Many of those people, because they're Th1 dominant, Th1 side of the immune system is the immune killer side. Th2 side is more the B cell making antibody side. So if you're already Th1 dominant and you do things to stimulate your immune process, then you'll actually feel worse. So if I take vitamin C, does it make me feel worse? Yeah, it really does. Well, then you're probably Th1 dominant. You really should not be taking supplements that have immune stimulants in it. You can find a list of those in my book, Help My Body's Killing Me. If you're Th2 dominant, same thing. So you just, taking green tea extract and curcumin. Boy, that makes me feel a lot worse. And I feel better when I take vitamin C. Then you're probably Th2 dominant, and you shouldn't be taking things that stimulate the Th2 side. There isn't really a test for that, but you should be testing for antibodies. And if you have an autoimmune disease, that's what you should be looking for. Also, since we're no longer doing cheek swab testing, how do I know if I still have mold or candida issues? There's a lab through Great Plains Laboratory called the Mycotox Profile. It's a really good lab that shows mold and the different types of mold that a person can have in their body. So that's a great test to run. And that will change over time. So as you treat that one mold, then you can run the testing in and you can see the change. We've seen that in people time and time again. So that's a test that you can run. You can really know a lot by your symptoms too. If you know you have a history of mold or candida problems, you still have symptoms, probably could still pretty good chance that it's still there. So it's not always a need to do expensive testing. So you have to use your deductive reasoning sense and put on your Sherlock Holmes hat a little bit and go, okay, well, this is still going on, and kind of dig to how you can better your situation. Also, my husband bought a Spooky 2 Rife machine. I'm wondering if I could use that to detox the mold and candida. Now, I'm not a specialist in Spooky 2. I'm not a fan of Spooky 2, but certainly it can be a tool that can be beneficial. So contact Spooky 2, see if they have programming for mold and candida. Certainly, you have a tool, you should use it. So I live in the country on 10 acres, and over 20 years, I've picked off hundreds of ticks on me. Should I be tested to find out if I have Lyme? If so, where? Yeah, that's a good thing. Remember, the deer tick is a little bit different than your regular tick, so you might not, you could take ticks off you all every day, and you still may not get Lyme. But to me, the best test is the DNA connections test. I talk about the different tests on the Lyme course that I have. I don't know if you're in the Lyme course or not, but it's on the testing page. If you're not in the Lyme course, then certainly you could just order the DNA connections test. It's a test that you do at home. It's a urine test, so it's super easy to do. You can order it through our store. Again, none of these tests are real cheap, though. That's the problem, is they can be expensive, and then all you get is a positive or negative. Now, the nice thing about the DNA connections test is a test for like 11 or 13 co-infections as well. And it gives you, it's just either highlighted or it's not highlighted. So it's super easy to read. We just email you the results. It's just so easy to look at and read. Some of the other more complicated and much more expensive tests are really difficult to understand how to interpret them. So I like the DNA connections test. It's real simple. You can do it at home. So look into that. All right, remember, no Zoom call January 4th. That's the first Wednesday of next month. I will be traveling, so I won't be able to do that. So thank you all. And I'll be praying for you and continue with your great questions. Bye-bye.